Hi, it's Brandon Smalley here from thirstsham.com, and today we're going to talk about the truth of plyometrics, speed, and agility training. How can you really develop them, and is it really the end-all be-all to athletic performance? Let's find out. So before we get started talking about speed, agility, and plyometrics, there's something you understand called the force velocity curve. Now I'm going to have a full 20-minute video on just the force velocity curve itself in the description box below. So if you really want to take a deep dive into that, I would highly check that out. But we're going to briefly recap that here quickly so you can understand what the force velocity curve, just in case if you don't know. So essentially the force velocity curve, when it comes to any kind of performance training, is going to look like this, okay? And so what we're gonna have is we're gonna have our force here and our velocity down here. And what this is saying is that heavier loads, so think of this as your 1 rep max here, and we'll just say hypothetically 20 rep max down here, but it doesn't really have to be. This could really go on for almost ever. But anything that we do from a performance perspective is going to land on this curve somewhere. And then the velocity is going to get faster, okay? So this is in meters per second, so the velocity is going to be faster, and therefore the amount of force that we can create is going to be less, because if the heavier weight is here, so again, this is the 1 rep max, so the higher this force gets, that if we draw a straight line down, then the speed of it is going to be relatively slow. That kind of makes sense. The heavier something is, the slower it's going to move. And then the lighter that load gets, the faster it is going to move up into an extent, and eventually this line will flat curve out, and there's just going to be enough ability to apply enough force to get something to move any faster. Okay, so you will eventually kind of cap out here, but the goal with all performance is to move this curve up and to the right. So if the next person, let's just say, is here, well, they can move whatever this 1 rep max is. If we bring that down here, we'll just say that this is 1 and this is 3 for an example in terms of our speed for our velocity, but again, that doesn't really matter. But for the point here is that if I'm moving the same weight faster, or a 1 rep max faster than this person, then I'm going to be a better athlete. And same thing here, as I can move these weights at a faster velocity, that I'm going to be a more explosive athlete. So now you're wanting to know, why does this matter? Well, it matters because speed, agility, and plyometrics are always going to be on this end of the spectrum in more cases than not. As you start to load them, add bands, do different resistance things, they're going to move more towards the middle, and then anything that's super heavy obviously is going to be here. So the reason we're talking about the force velocity curve is because if you want to truly understand performance gains, you can't just do everything on this side of the curve and expect to get better. This side of the curve also has to get addressed, because again, we need to move it up and to the right. So we do need a blend of strength. We do need a blend of power. We do need a blend of what I would say, you know, your hypertrophy is usually going to be in here. It's not usually moved super fast, but what you can get at is that you are going to have to build some muscle tissue, and then you are obviously going to have to learn how to move very fast, or even we can even talk about overspeed as well, because eventually you've got to get to an overspeed per aspect, and then you've got different types of power in here. You've got strength, speed strength, all those kind of qualities. Those all are going to fall in this area right here, essentially between the kind of in the power area. But you've got to be able to train all along this curve to optimally develop any kind of athletic power, because if you spend too much time in one area, it means you're neglecting time in another area. And therefore, this curve begins to become unbalanced, and you can see how it's eventually going to hit a rate limiter where something's going to be limiting our performance. If you spend so much time down here, I can guarantee you that that part is probably going to be your limiting factor. Okay, now that we got a brief, just understanding of the force velocity curve, let's talk about what you can do as an athlete or even a parent of an athlete to help ensure your kid has success in the weight room, but also on the field, court, swimming pool, what have you. So majority of sport, as we talked about, is on that if we looked at that force velocity curve on that high velocity end, okay? So that's where general strength training, so if you're newer or you are a younger athlete, okay, we need to look at long-term athletic development, and then generally that's going to be being a multi-sport athlete as long as you can potentially do it. But then we've also need to stay more general in nature in terms of general movement, okay? And then also we want to make sure that we are having variety, but we also want to make sure that that variety leads to no burnout. Okay, so these are kind of the things that we want from a younger population. So games, practices, multiple sports, that's all great. So if you look at what this is all missing, the missing link here is going to be general strength. Okay, that's what most of these kids are going to be missing. And the reason they're missing that is the only way you're going to get general strength is finding ways to challenge them outside of their sport. So usually you're going to need load to be able to do that, but it doesn't have to be heavy. If we're talking about kids that are 12, 13 under, dumbbells, kettlebells, sleds, body weight movements, and some load, landmines, maybe some barbell work as they get a little bit older. That's all going to check this port of general strength. And what happens is when we're generally strong, then it makes it easier for our body to absorb these forces that we're getting from that aspect on the force velocity curve, which is down there higher towards that velocity, because that's what we're being exposed to all the time. So for most younger athletes, we're usually missing general strength, not so much of the plyometric speed and agility portion of it, because if they're doing this, they should be getting that naturally in play. Okay, now we're talking about more about the high school age child. Okay, so this athlete probably actually is getting some strength training, in their high school setting of some degree. And usually what I say by this is they're usually going to be doing your back squat, your bench press, your power clean, your deadlift as kind of your main focused movements. Okay, that's what they're going to kind of go after. So what we find in many of these athletes when it comes to the speed, power, and speed, plyometrics, quickness, and agility is that they start to actually get away from this. They've also generally started to specialize, which can be an okay thing. I think once you get to be about 16 plus, I think specializing can be okay, especially if you're trying to look at college sports or anything on. You do need to start to specialize at some point, but I do believe if you're that 14 age kid, you probably still should try to do as many sports in high school as you can, so long as you can make the rosters and continue to be active. I think that's probably the better play, better long-term play. But regardless, you will start to see specialization happen here at a very higher rate than you will at young athletics, even though it's starting to switch, but you get my point. So they're generally only moving in certain planes that are specific to their sport. So what you're going to find that these people need, they do need more speed, agility, and quickness training. And again, that needs to be more general at first. And then as they go to, let's just say senior year, then you can start to specialize even more here. And then you can start to focus on your speed, agility, and quickness. Now, because we've got strength, we've got general qualities already built, assuming that this is going to be a college-based athlete or somebody aiming for college, then we can do more speed, agility, and quickness, still keeping it general in nature and getting specific as we need to, because now we can get it honed towards their sport so they're good at those movements. But if they still have been lacking on speed, agility, and quickness training, being general is still going to help most of these athletes, because this is not going to be covered in their general strength and conditioning based program. And if they start to specialize, that means they're usually only moving in certain ranges of motion and certain movement patterns that are specific towards their sport. So a good example would be a football player, usually not very good at rotating. The only exception being a quarterback. Everybody else is usually taught to be big, stiff, and strong and not move well. So if we can do speed, agility, quickness that gets them how to flip their hips, how to turn, how to rotate, do different landmine work, throw med balls, that's more general in nature, but that's going to make them more athletic in nature. And if they're more athletic, once we come time to specialize here, about that senior year time, we should have a better speed, agility, and quickness development aspect of our athlete, and we're going to have a better athlete to work with that final year. Okay, so one of the big questions that you're probably wondering is, well, how do I develop speed, agility, quickness, and plyometrics? So the first thing I'm going to recommend, if at all possible, if you start doing any kind of training, you should start immediately with your SAQ work, but you want to do this in low doses, okay? So the biggest issue that I see with speed, agility, quickness, and plyometric training is too much, too fast, okay? Usually that's a recipe for disaster. This is gonna lead to things like shin splints, low back issues, achy hips, knees, or any kind of tendonitis issues, ankle issues, turf toe. Usually those kind of diagnoses are a sign of overuse, overtraining, or doing too much too quickly. So I always want to say low and slow when it comes to anything speed, agility, quickness, plyometrics. It's always easier to increase your volume, your intensity, and your frequency if you start with a lower starting point and ramp up over time, rather than starting high, because pulling back means you're gonna have to probably pull back a ton to get any of those nagging injuries to officially go away or stop being an issue when you're actually doing sport. And the bad thing is, since many of these resemble athletic-based movements, you're probably doing them in sport and practice already. So these should be things that are going to aid your performance, but again, starting low and slow is probably the best recipe to make sure that you have good success. What does low and slow look like? Let's just say hypothetically, we're going to go with the box jump, okay? So if we're gonna start with the box jump, we might wanna start with 3 sets of 5. Now, this does not seem like that hard of work. Honestly, it's not. I do box jumps myself. This is not a very hard place to start. But if I want to improve, this is gonna equal a 15 total exposures, okay? I wanna make a small jump in exposure. So for the following training session, I go 3 by 6, well now I'm at 18, okay? So what that did, if you're not good at math, I'll help you out, but if you're really good at math, you understand that that's a 20% increase, because 10% is 1.5, we went up 3, so that's gonna be a 20% increase, okay? That's pretty big when it comes to training stimuluses, even though it's only 1 extra rep, okay? But that's probably the most logical way to do this, because if we went to 4 sets of 5, that's probably going to be 20. That's too much. That's a 25%. That's probably way too much. So what we want to probably do is go 3 by 6. Your other option would be to go 4 by 4, and that's going to give you 16 exposures. Okay, so you're going to look not even at 10%. So to me, 10% is kind of the sweet spot. So if I had to pick one, you want to go 16 or 18. 3 by 6 usually makes it easier. That's just 1 extra rep per set. But then if we want to look at the next week, okay, so we did 3 by 6, we can either, the next logical one for me is to go 4 by 5. This is a very common method that I use myself. So that's going to give us 20. So again, we went up plus 2. And then my next week we go 4 by 6. That's going to give us 24, our biggest jump yet, okay? But that's going to give us plus 4. But again, if you go back to the math, that's going to be around 20%. So you're looking around 20% jumps consistently across your programming cycle. And what that's going to do is going to allow you to make slow and steady pace on one particular activity. Now the next thing is going to be is, well, where do I go from here? Well, now you can begin to improve your box jump by adding different variables, adding hurdles, adding depth drops, adding intensity by maybe raising this height up. This is just assuming the same height, right? So maybe the following cycle, we repeat this, but now we go up 3 or 6 inches if the athlete can. Now intensity went up, but volume went down. That's a good, healthy relationship to help improve speed, agility, and your plyometrics. All right, step number 2 is going to be to do what you need, not what you like, okay? So this is gonna be a little bit more detailed, I guess, but when you look at athletes and they jump and they run and they change direction, part of our goal is to figure out what are they not good at. So we're gonna take an athlete, I'm not even gonna say what sport because it doesn't really matter, but we're just gonna say that they're essentially, when they land, we've got knee cave and butt drop, or what I like to say, their butt just keeps falling to the ground. When they go to change direction, same thing, they keep going. Okay, they don't really have that stop. Okay, and then when they actually jump, they prefer a rebound, or they like to use the stretch shortening cycle. Oops, misspelled that, or misabbreviated that. Stretch shortening cycle, okay? So we've kind of got our major things that this athlete needs to work on. Their butt falls to the ground, they can't stop and change direction, the body just continues to keep going, and when they do jump, they prefer to like preload and go, or step into their jump and go. So what that tells me is this is not a high force producing athlete, okay? They do not produce force well. And I know that because they can't absorb the force that they're creating. They can't stop the force once they have it going. They can't create a stop. Their body just continues to go. Or when they go to jump, they're using their stretch shortening cycle because they can actually develop more force that way. They can't just get going right off the get-go. So knowing these three things, here's what I do know, is that they need to increase general strength, okay? Anybody that is usually very stretch shortening cycle biased needs more general strength. That's the only way they're going to increase their force. So if we go back to that lovely force velocity curve here, they love spending time down here. So they need more time up here getting general strength to get their force velocity curve to move up and to the right. The next thing they're going to need is, since this continues to go down, they're not only going to need general strength, they're going to need to work on activities that teach them how to yield and how to stop. So this person needs to increase yielding potential. So what that means in this case, if I'm looking at landing and dropping, that I want depth drops, and I also want like seated and non-stretch shortening cycle activities. And the reason that is because, again, they're good at using their stretch shortening cycle. So depth drops are going to teach them how to stop and stick that landing. Obviously, we're only going to go as high as they comfortably can go. The next is then going to be doing things seated, because again, if they're doing it seated, their feet have to stay flat and they've got to go. They just got to create that force. They're not actually doing any kind of counter movement, related movement to get them jumping. So again, that's going to take away the stretch shortening cycle. And we kind of look at the same thing in terms of the change of direction here, is that they look like they continue just to keep going. So again, we still want to continue on decreasing that yield, but we want to learn on how to stick positions, regardless of what we're doing. So if we're going to actually chop, we want to stop and be able to stop. We don't want to have the body continue to go. We want to learn how to stop on a dime. So any of our change of direction stuff needs to work on stopping and decel before we can get to our acceleration mechanics, because quite frankly, they can't change direction to where they want to go. So their acceleration's already going to be crap because they can't stop well enough to go where they want to go, as I couldn't stop holding onto that marker. They can't stop to be able to reaccelerate. So focusing on just acceleration, it might get them that first step as they go to sprint, if it's just a linear takeoff, but more than likely, if they're doing anything that's going to involve change directions, which is essentially what we kind of assessed here and assumed, we need to be able to stop, change direction, and then reaccelerate. So if we can get these stopping and deceleration mechanics honed down, now it's going to be easier in following cycles to just focus on the acceleration port, because now if they're stopping and doing well here, they're yielding better, they've got more general strength. The acceleration, honestly, this is probably going to follow once all this happens, because they're going to be in a better position to be able to accelerate, and regardless of what they do. Okay, the last bullet point in terms of how to develop your speed, agility, and quickness, improve your plyometrics. The next thing is going to be train frequently. Okay, now the reason I say this is because when it comes to residuals, which essentially looks at how long after we've trained a specific quality will it stick around so that it actually benefits us before we start to actually see a decrease of improvement in that training quality. So for speed and agility, power, this is usually 3 to 5 days that we start to see an actual decrease in our training residual from our speed, agility, and plyometrics. So essentially what this means is you need to do this 2 times per week just to maintain or improve, we'll say maintain or improve that quality. Now, if you're an athlete, you should be running, jumping, playing your sport on a pretty frequent basis. So you should be getting some sprinting, some running, some jumping, some change of direction pretty frequently, unless if you obviously are in a sport like swimming, where you don't really have any kind of ground contacts, but you're still in the pool quite a bit, which is why they can do that more frequently, if you were wondering, because it's less hard on the joints. But generally speaking, you're going to want to focus on this visual of every 3 to 5 days, 2 times a week. So if you're going into the gym or you're going to train to improve your speed, agility, quickness, power, plyometric based activities, ideally you want to do this at least twice a week to optimize on that, and making sure they're kind of spread out. It's like a Monday and Thursday, Tuesday, Friday, Monday, Friday, something like that, where they're kind of spread out. So you're getting that stimulation every couple of days, and then you can build on that stimulus to improve your performance, which is going to make it a lot easier to do so. So you want to make sure that you've got enough training frequency, but again, still making sure that we're still staying low and slow in terms of how we are progressing. With that, we kind of talked about that, and then ensuring that it's also paired. It's still got to be paired with strength work. Okay, it just does, and that's the truth of the matter when it comes to any speed, agility, quickness, plyometric training, is that anytime it's paired with strength training, it's going to last, and you're going to improve the whole curve. Again, you're going to improve that whole curve. So by improving that whole curve, what you're doing from a speed, agility, and quickness perspective, paired with the strength, your whole curve is going to move up and to the right. And by being stronger, you're going to be able to maximize the results you're going to see from being able to put force into the ground or absorb force, because as you can put more force, you're going to be able to propel your body elsewhere in space faster and quicker than your opponent. There's obviously also benefits in terms of resiliency and tendon health and movement quality and all that other great stuff that comes from strength training, but it's just going to go better with your speed, agility, and quickness. And so that's honestly the truth of how speed, agility, quickness, and plyometrics work, is that while they work in the short term because of this residual, at the same time, it's a double-edged sword, because if you go through, say, an 8-week training process of improving your vertical jump and you're doing it 3 times a week, yeah, you're getting those residuals, you're getting your training, you're seeing that vertical improve. But the bad thing is, as soon as you stop doing that 8-week course, in up to 3 weeks, you're gonna probably see your vertical go back down to where you were, back to your base level. And that's because, again, low and slow, drawing things out, the longer you can do an activity more consistently, the better odds of that residual and that training effect staying long term, especially when you develop it with strength, because strength does take a long time to develop. It lasts the longest in terms of a residual, up to a month without going any kind of major strength training. You're still going to keep those. So you can go a little bit of time without strength and conditioning training and still stay fast, strong, explosive, as long as you're focusing on these. But as soon as you ditch that 8-week vertical course and you go do something else, chances are you're not going to see the same progress that you had you paired it up with your strength and conditioning training, and even try to get in the gym 1 time a week to maintain those gains. All right, that wraps up today's video on the truth about speed, agility, quickness, power, plyometrics, moving fast, whatever you want to say. That wraps up today's video on the truth about how you can make sure that your speed, agility, and quickness continues to improve, how to ideally lay out your training, why certain things work the way that they do, and ideally the most beneficial way to optimize that is pairing that with a solid strength program with your speed, agility, and quickness, and more than likely you're going to have great success improving your athleticism. If you've got any questions, please feel free to let me know down in the comment section below. Thanks for checking in, and we'll see you next week.